At my father's funeral, I watched from the back as they announced I inherited nothing. My cousins whisper that I was not even her real kid had become a legal death sentence. I thought I had escaped my stepmother's decade of silent warfare, but a desperate call at 2 a.m. from my dying father changed everything. Now, holding the real will, I must choose burn their stolen empire to the ground or let the truth die with him. My name is Violet Rivera, and at 29 years old, I had become a ghost in the only life I had ever known. I stood at the very last row of the ancient stone cathedral in Lake Haven, my back pressed against the cold, unyielding oak of the heavy doors. The air inside was thick enough to choke on, heavy with the scent of 1,000 white lilies and the expensive, cloying perfume of the high society elite who had gathered to mourn a man they barely knew. Up at the front, bathed in the soft, amber glow of the recessed lighting, lay the mahogany casket of my father, Graham Harlow. He was the titan of the steel industry, the face of Harlow Meridian Industries, and to everyone else in this room, a legend. To me, he was just the man who had stopped looking me in the eye a decade ago. The funeral was grotesque in its opulence. It did not feel like a farewell. It felt like a coronation for the woman left behind. Vivian Ashford sat in the front row, her posture rigid and perfect. She was 52, but thanks to the best surgeons in Zurich and a lifetime of avoiding manual labor, she looked a decade younger. She wore a black dress that fit her like a second skin, tasteful enough for a widow, but cut sharply enough to remind everyone that she was still vibrant, still powerful. She had been a catalog model before she met my father, and she had never forgotten how to find her light. Every time a photographer's flash went off from the press pool designated to the side, Vivian dabbed a dry eye with a lace handkerchief. She cried on cue. She sighed on cue. It was a masterclass in performative grief. Seated next to her was Tori Gaines, my 27-year-old cousin. Tori was the daughter of Vivian's sister, but she looked more like Vivian than anyone else. She was dressed as if she were attending a Met Gala after-party rather than a funeral, in a black silk ensemble that cost more than the truck I drove. Her blonde hair was sleeked back, and her fingers danced across the screen of her phone, likely checking the stock prices or the social media coverage of the event. Every few seconds, she would lift her head, scan the room until her eyes locked on me in the shadows of the back row, and offer a sneer so subtle it could almost pass for a grimace of pain. The priest finished his generic homily about dust returning to dust. The silence that followed was heavy, expectant. Then, the click of heels echoed against the stone floor. Vivian ascended the podium. She adjusted the microphone with a manicured hand, her diamond rings catching the light, fracturing it into prisms that danced across the casket. She took a breath, a shaky, rehearsed intake of air that the microphone amplified for the entire congregation. Graham was a model husband. She began, her voice trembling with an emotion that felt manufactured in a lab. He was a visionary, a leader, and most importantly, he was an exemplary father to his true children. The air left the room. It happened in a split second. The silence shifted from respectful to awkward. Heads turned, not all at once, but in a ripple. The board members, the socialites, the rival CEOs, they all turned in their pews to look back at me. They knew who I was. They knew I was Graham's only biological child. But Vivian's words hung in the vaulted ceiling like a poisonous cloud. To his true children, she had emphasized the word true with a strange, heavy cadence. The reporters in the press pen scribbled furiously. Shutters clicked rapidly. The sound like frantic insects. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, not from shame, but from a cold, burning fury. I kept my face impassive. I had practiced this face for 10 years. Vivian continued. Ignoring the ripple she had caused, she spoke of their shared dreams, of the legacy he left behind for her and Tori to protect. As she spoke, a large screen descended behind the altar. A slideshow began to play. It was a montage of a life I did not recognize. There was Graham, smiling on a yacht in the Mediterranean, with Vivian laughing and holding a champagne flute. Click, Graham and Tori cutting the ribbon at the new rolling mill in Ohio. Click, the three of them Graham, Vivian, Tori posing in matching sweaters at a ski lodge in Aspen. I watched, paralyzed. I waited for a single image of me, just one. A graduation photo, a birthday, a candid shot from the years before Vivian turned our home into a war zone. There was nothing. Hundreds of photos cycled through, backed by a weeping cello recording. I had been surgically removed from the visual history of the Harlow family. It was as if I had never been born. The message was clear, broadcasted in high definition to the entire city of Lake Haven. Violet Rivera does not exist. As the slideshow ended and the choir began a mournful hymn, the congregation stood to pay their final respects. The line moved slowly toward the open casket. I stepped out of the shadows, my legs feeling heavy, like they were filled with lead. I did not care about the money. I did not care about the company. I just wanted to see his face one last time. I wanted to see if he looked peaceful. I wanted to see if the man who had called me in the dead of night was still there, somewhere behind the makeup of the mortician. I made it 3 steps down the center aisle. A large man in a charcoal suit stepped directly into my path. He was not one of the regular family security detail I remembered from childhood. He was new, hired muscle. His face was a slab of granite. "Mrs. Ashford has requested you maintain your distance," he said. His voice was low, barely a rumble, meant only for me. "You are not to approach the casket." I looked up at him, stunned. "I am his daughter," I whispered, my voice cracking despite my best efforts to hold it together. The man did not blink. He did not move. He simply crossed his hands in front of him, a physical wall between me and my father. "Please do not cause a scene, Ms. Rivera. The press is watching." I looked past his shoulder. Vivian was standing by the head of the casket, accepting condolences from the mayor. She looked up, her eyes meeting mine across the length of the aisle. There was no sorrow in them. There was only a cold, triumphant glint. She gave the slightest nod to the security guard. I was blocked. Banned from saying goodbye to my own father at his own funeral. I stepped back, my heart hammering against my ribs. I retreated to the side, near a marble pillar, trying to make myself invisible again. The service ended, but the humiliation was far from over. Usually, a will is read in the privacy of a lawyer's mahogany-paneled office, days after the earth has settled. But Vivian was a creature of spectacle. She needed the world to witness her victory. She needed the severance to be public. Darren Cole, the company's chief legal counsel, a man who had once given me candy when I visited the office as a child, stepped up to a lectern set up near the transept. He looked uncomfortable, adjusting his glasses, sweating slightly under the lights. In accordance with Graham Harlow's final wishes regarding the immediate succession of the Meridian Empire, he announced, his voice echoing thinly, "We are releasing the summary of the estate distribution to ensure market stability." Market stability, that was the excuse. He began to read. It was a slaughter. "To my devoted wife, Vivian Ashford, I leave the controlling interest in Harlow Meridian Industries, the Ridgestone estate, and the entirety of my liquid assets, to my niece, Tori Gaines, whom I love as my own. I bequeath the remaining portfolio and a seat on the board of directors." The room buzzed. It was a massive transfer of wealth, billions of dollars shifting hands in a sentence. "And regarding Violet Rivera," Darren continued, his voice dropping an octave, rushing through the words as if they burned his tongue. "Ms. Rivera has voluntarily waived all rights to inheritance and has been provided for in accordance with her standing in the family, which is to say, the estate leaves her nothing, as per the mutual estrangement." He closed the folder, "voluntarily waived." The phrase hit me like a physical blow. It was a lie so audacious, so flatly contradictory to reality, that I almost laughed. I had waived nothing. I had agreed to nothing. Tori, who had moved away from the casket, glided toward me. The cameras were pivoting, sensing the tension. They were hungry for the reaction shot, the rejected daughter, the outcast. Tori stopped inches from me. She smelled of expensive vanilla and arrogance. She clapped her hands together softly, a mocking applause that only I could hear. She leaned in, her lips brushing my ear, intimate and cruel. You did not think a stepchild kicked out 10 years ago would get anything. Did you? She whispered. Her voice was light, airy. Be serious. Violet. She pulled back, looking at me with pity that played perfectly for the cameras. Then she dropped the mask for just a second, her eyes narrowing into slits. You are not even her real kid, she hissed. She just let you stay so she could beat you down. Now you are done. Before I could respond, before I could scream, or slap her, or demand to see the paper Darren Cole was holding, Vivian made a subtle gesture with her hand. It was a flick of the wrist, like swatting away a fly. 2 more security guards materialized at my elbows. Ms. Rivera, one of them said, it is time to go. They did not drag me, but the pressure on my arms was firm. They were guiding me out, forcefully. I was being evicted from the house of God, evicted from my family, evicted from my father's death. I looked back one last time. Vivian was holding court, shaking hands, accepting the condolences of a senator. She did not look at me. I was already gone to her. I was debris, swept out the back door. I walked out of the heavy church doors and into the gray, drizzling afternoon of Lake Haven. The cool air hit my face, mixing with the hot tears I refused to let fall. The crowd outside onlookers who could not get in whispered as I descended the stone steps alone. She got nothing. Look at her. That is the daughter. The whispers swirled around me, a vortex of judgment. But as I reached the bottom of the steps, standing alone on the wet pavement, the noise of the crowd faded, the sound of the traffic, the click of the cameras, the heavy toll of the funeral bell, it all receded. In the silence of my own head, a single sound played on a loop. It was terrifying. It was fragile. It was the only thing I had left. It was the phone call from 2 a.m. The connection had been full of static. The voice had been unrecognizable at first, rasping, drowning in fluid, weak as a dying bird. Violet. I had frozen in my bed. The phone pressed to my ear. Dad, don't trust them. He had wheezed. Each word sounded like it cost him a piece of his soul. Do not trust what they show you. Do not trust the paper. Dad, where are you? I had screamed into the phone. Find Reeves. He had gasped. He has the envelope. The brown envelope. Don't let them. Then there had been a scuffle, a crash. The line had gone dead. Standing there in the rain, watching the black limousines line up to take Vivian and Tori to a reception paid for with my father's blood money, I clenched my fists. My fingernails dug into my palms until I felt the sharp sting of skin breaking. Darren Cole said I had waived my rights. Vivian said I was not a real child. Tori said I was beaten down. They thought this was the end. They thought they had buried Graham Harlow and erased Violet Rivera in the same afternoon. I pulled my coat tighter around me and turned my back on the church. I did not walk toward my truck. I walked toward the street, my mind sharpening into a weapon. I would find Reeves. I would find that envelope, and I would make them regret the day they decided I was not real enough to fear. The rain outside the church in Lake Haven felt cold, but it was nothing compared to the chill that had lived in my bones for 17 years. Standing there, shivering in the aftermath of my father's funeral, the voice in my head wasn't the priest's. It wasn't even my own. It was Tori's whisper, echoing backward through time, dragging me down into the dark waters of memory where the drowning actually began. You are not even her real kid. That sentence did not start in the church. It started the day the silence took over the house. I was 12 years old when my mother, Elena, died. It was not a tragic, cinematic accident. It was a stroke. 1 minute she was laughing at the kitchen island, chopping basil for pasta, and the next minute there was the sound of a knife hitting the ceramic tile, then a body hitting the floor, then silence. The ambulance lights that flashed against the living room windows that night burned a permanent afterimage into my retinas. I remembered the way the paramedics moved, urgent but resigned. I remembered the half-chopped basil wilting on the cutting board, turning black at the edges as the hours ticked by, and no one remembered to throw it away. After the funeral, the Ridgestone estate, our sprawling mansion on the hill, transformed. It ceased to be a home and became a mausoleum. My father, Graham Harlow, did not know how to grieve. He only knew how to work. He threw himself into Harlow Meridian Industries with a terrifying fervor, leaving the house before the sun came up and returning long after I had put myself to bed. The house became a vast, echoing chamber of polished wood and dust motes dancing in shafts of lonely sunlight. I spent months wandering the hallways, listening to the grandfather clock in the foyer tick away the seconds of my childhood. Tick, tock, you are alone. Tick, tock, he is not coming home. The silence lasted exactly 6 months. Then came the perfume. I smelled Vivian before I saw her. It was a heavy, floral scent, jasmine and expensive musk, that seemed to suffocate the lingering smell of lemon polish my mother had loved. I was sitting at the dining table, doing homework alone. When the front door opened, my father walked in, looking more alive than he had since the ambulance came. But he wasn't alone. Hanging on his arm was a woman in a pristine white dress that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread. Not a Tuesday night dinner. She had blonde hair that fell in perfect waves and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Violet," my father said, his voice sounding rusty from disuse. "This is Vivian. She's going to help us start again." Vivian crouched down, though she was careful not to let her knees actually touch the floor. She looked at me with a practiced warmth, the kind you see in toothpaste commercials. "You must be Violet," she said. "Your father says you are such a mature young lady, so smart, so capable." For the first 2 hours, she was perfect. She laughed at my father's dry jokes. She complimented the house. She asked me about school. But the mask slipped the moment my father left the room to take a call from the Tokyo office. We were in the kitchen. I was putting my plate in the dishwasher. Vivian was leaning against the counter, sipping a glass of Chardonnay. The warmth evaporated from her face instantly, replaced by a bored, icy stare. She looked at me like I was a stain on the marble countertop that she would eventually have to scrub out. "You are a big girl, Violet," she said softly. Her voice was different now, sharper, colder. "You should learn when to disappear. Adults need space. Do not hover. It is unattractive." I froze, holding a dirty fork. I didn't understand. I hadn't been hovering. I lived here. That was the first rule of the new regime. Visibility was a sin. A year later, the invasion was complete. Vivian and my father were married in a ceremony I was barely invited to, and shortly after, the moving trucks arrived. But they weren't just bringing Vivian's things. "This is my niece, Tori," Vivian announced one afternoon. Tori Gaines was 10 years old, 2 years younger than me, but she already had the eyes of a predator. She stood in the foyer, clutching a designer backpack, looking around the grand hall with an appraising sneer. "Tori needs a stable environment," Vivian explained to my father, smoothing his lapel. "The schools in her district are terrible. It is only right she stays with us. Family helps family." "Graham." My father nodded, entranced. "Of course, she is welcome." The displacement was swift. "Violet, you do not really need the south bedroom, do you?" Vivian asked the next day. It wasn't a question. "It has the best light for Tori to study. You are always so busy with your little projects. The guest room in the north wing will be quieter for you." The south bedroom was my room. It was the room my mother had painted a soft lavender for me. It was the room next to my parents' suite. The north wing was on the other side of the house, past the library and the unused formal parlor. It was cold, drafty, and isolated. I tried to protest, but Dad, I started. Graham didn't even look up from his newspaper. "Listen to Vivian. Violet, be accommodating." I was moved out by sunset. Tori moved in, and within a week, my lavender walls were painted a stark, aggressive beige. My mother's hand-sewn curtains were in the trash. The real violence, however, wasn't about real estate. It was about memory. Dinner was mandatory. That was one of Vivian's rules. We had to present the image of a cohesive unit. One evening, about 3 months after Tori moved in, I came to the table holding a small ceramic figurine, a bluebird that had belonged to my mother. I wanted to put it on the mantelpiece in the living room, a small reclamation of space. Vivian saw it and stopped eating. She put her fork down with a deliberate clink. "Violet, we discussed this," she said, her voice dripping with faux patience. "We are creating a fresh start. Clutter keeps us in the past. It is not clutter," I said, my voice trembling. "It is Mom's. I just want one thing of hers in the room." My father was staring into his wine glass. He looked tired. He always looked tired when I tried to exist. Tori looked up from her plate. She had sauce on the corner of her mouth, but she looked at me with the superiority of a queen addressing a peasant. "She is not even your real kid." "Aunt Viv," Tori said. She said it casually, like she was commenting on the weather. "Why do we have to keep her stuff?" The air left the room. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked at my father. This was it. This was the moment. He would slam his hand on the table. He would tell Tori to never speak like that again. He would claim me. I waited. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Graham Harlow took a long swallow of his red wine. He wiped his mouth with a linen napkin. He did not look at me. He did not look at Tori. He simply signaled the maid to refill his glass. His silence was a deafening roar. It was an endorsement. Vivian shrugged. A small, elegant movement of her shoulders. "See, Violet. Even Tori understands. Let us not be difficult." That night, I took the bluebird to my room in the north wing and hid it under my pillow. I didn't cry. I think that was the night I stopped crying. I realized that tears were a currency that had no value in this house. As we grew up, the distinction between the daughter and the niece vanished, only to be replaced by a new hierarchy, the chosen and the burden. The double standards were subtle, woven into the fabric of our daily lives like a poisonous thread. When I brought home a report card with straight A's, Vivian would barely glance at it. "Well, naturally," she would say, filing her nails. "You have nothing else to do but study. You certainly are not socializing. It is expected. Violet, do not fish for compliments for doing the bare minimum." But when Tori managed to scrape a C- in history, Vivian would throw a celebration dinner. "Look how hard she is trying." "Graham," Vivian would gush, pouring champagne. "She is struggling, but she persists. That is grit. That is character. We should get her a tutor, the expensive one from the university, and maybe a spa day to decompress." I learned to do my own laundry when I was 13 because the housekeeper was instructed to prioritize the family loads. I learned to cook my own meals because often the cook was told to make dishes I was allergic to, or dinner was served at times when I was at the library, and no one thought to save me a plate. Meanwhile, a town car waited for Tori every morning. Stylists came to the house to dress her for school dances I wasn't allowed to attend because I had chores. "You need to learn responsibility," Vivian told me as I scrubbed the patio furniture while Tori lounged by the pool. "The real world will not coddle you." She was right. Of course, the world wouldn't coddle me. But she was ensuring I faced it with calloused hands and a frozen heart. The final severance began when I was 17. It was time to apply for university. I had spent years hiding in the garage, taking apart old radios, fixing the lawnmower, understanding how things worked. Machines made sense. Machines didn't lie. Machines didn't hate you for existing. I wanted to study structural engineering. I wanted to build things that wouldn't fall down. I brought the brochures to the living room one evening. I wanted to show my father. I wanted him to see that I could be useful to Harlow Meridian. "I was thinking about the Institute of Technology," I said, placing the glossy pamphlet on the coffee table. "For engineering." Vivian picked up the brochure with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated. "Engineering," she laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, Violet, that is so dry and messy. Grease and dust. It is hardly suitable for a lady." She tossed the brochure back onto the table. It slid off the edge and fell to the floor. "You should look into public relations, like Tori," she continued. "Or perhaps art history. Something light. something that does not require you to pretend you can run a factory. I looked at my father. Dad, I want to understand the business, the core of it, the metal. Vivian cut in before he could speak. Her voice dropped, becoming silky and dangerous. Let us be realistic, dear. By the time you graduate, who knows what the company will look like, the Harlow name? Well, names change, dynasties evolve. You should prepare for a future where you have to rely on other talents. It was the first time she said it out loud. The implication that the company, the legacy, the name itself, was not going to be mine. Names change. She meant hers. She meant Tori's. Graham looked uncomfortable. He stood up, smoothing his trousers. We will discuss tuition later, he mumbled, and walked out of the room. He paid for my tuition. But that was all. There was no pride, no good luck, just a check signed by his accountant. The night before I left for college, the house was quiet. Vivian and Tori were out at a gala. I was packing the last of my boxes in the north wing. My door creaked open. My father stood there. He was swaying slightly. The smell of scotch wafted into the room, overpowering the smell of old dust. He looked older than his years, his face gray and slack. He stumbled into the room and sat heavily on the edge of my bed. He watched me tape up a box of books. You are leaving, he said. It was a statement, not a question. Yes, Dad, tomorrow. He nodded slowly. He reached out and grabbed my wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong, desperate. He pulled me toward him, an awkward, clumsy hug that smelled of liquor and regret. Violet, he whispered into my hair. I held my breath. I thought, finally, he is going to say he loves me. He is going to say he is sorry. He is going to say he will miss me. He pulled back and looked me in the eye. His eyes were glassy, unfocused. Don't disappoint me, he slurred. Don't disappoint me like your mother did. I froze. The words hit me like a physical slap. My mother had died. She hadn't left him. She hadn't cheated. She had died of a stroke in his kitchen. How had she disappointed him by leaving him alone with a daughter he didn't know how to love? He released me and stood up, swaying. He didn't explain. He just turned and walked out of the room, leaving the door open behind him. I stood there in the center of my empty room, the nonsensical cruelty of his words settling into my skin like a tattoo. That was his goodbye. Not I love you, not be safe. Just a warning not to repeat the sin of dying. I left the next morning before sunrise. I didn't say goodbye to Vivian. I didn't say goodbye to Tori. I drove my beat-up sedan down the long, winding driveway of the Ridgestone estate, watching the house shrink in my rearview mirror until it was just a gray smudge against the dawn sky. I told myself I would never look back. I told myself I was free. But as I drove onto the highway, the ghost of Tori's voice sat in the passenger seat, whispering the truth I couldn't outrun. You are not even her real kid. I didn't know then that escaping the house was the easy part, escaping the plan they had written for me that would take a war. And 10 years later, standing in the rain outside my father's funeral, I realized the war had only just begun. I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in systems engineering, holding a portfolio that had been courted by defense contractors and tech giants in Silicon Valley. I could have gone anywhere. I could have gone to a place where my last name was just a word on a resume, not a loaded gun, but I was 22, and I was possessed by a stupid, relentless hope. I believed that if I brought my talent home, if I applied my mind to the family empire, my father would finally see me not as a dead woman's ghost, but as his daughter. I declined 3 six-figure offers and applied to Harlow Meridian Industries. I did not get the corner office. I did not get a welcome lunch. Graham Harlow, the CEO, hired me, but he hid me, while Tori, fresh out of a mediocre communications program with a C average, was immediately appointed as the junior director of public relations with an office on the 42nd floor overlooking the lake. I was assigned to the basement, literally. My workspace was a converted storage closet in the logistics department on level B2. My title was contract analyst. No benefits, no parking spot. Just a desk that wobbled and a computer that hummed like a dying lawnmower. I told myself it was a test. I told myself he wanted me to learn the business from the ground up, to understand the steel in our veins before I tried to wear the crown. So I worked like a dog. I arrived at 6 in the morning, 2 hours before the executives rolled their Lexuses into the reserved garage spots. I stayed until 9 at night, eating vending machine sandwiches while the cleaning crew vacuumed around my feet. I was invisible, and I used that invisibility to see everything. My job was to digitize and audit old shipping manifests. It was grunt work, intended to be boring enough to make me quit. Instead, it was a treasure map. Harlow Meridian moved millions of tons of steel a year. Beams for skyscrapers, sheets for automotive bodies, cables for suspension bridges. It was a chaotic ocean of numbers. But I spoke the language of patterns. By my 6th month, I noticed a discrepancy in the Trans-Pacific shipping routes. There were invoices for shipping containers that were logged as full weight upon departure, but registered as empty upon arrival at intermediate ports. Yet the billing remained for full tonnage. I wrote a script to cross-reference these anomalies with our vendor list. I found a ghost, a company called Apex Trans Global. They were billing us for logistics support, fuel surcharges, and emergency warehousing. The only problem was that their registered address was a P.O. box in the Cayman Islands, and their shipping routes did not exist on any maritime map. I dug deeper. I pulled the metadata from the invoices. They weren't coming from an external server. They were being generated internally, approved by a digital signature key that bypassed the usual 3-step authorization protocol. I did the math. Over 5 years, Apex Trans Global had siphoned off $42 million from Harlow Meridian. My hands shook as I printed the spreadsheet. This was it. This was the moment I would save the company. This was the moment Graham would look at me and realize I was the one who had his back. I requested a meeting with the CEO, his secretary, a woman who looked at me with pity, slotted me in for 15 minutes on a Friday afternoon. I walked into his office on the top floor, clutching my binder. The room smelled of leather and cedar. Graham sat behind his massive oak desk, looking out at the skyline. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes etched deep. "Violet," he said, not turning around. "Make it quick. I have a dinner at the club." "Dad," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I found something in the logistics audit. Someone is stealing from us." He turned his chair around, his eyebrows raised. "Stealing?" I laid the binder on his desk. I opened it to the flowcharts I had created. "It is a shell company called Apex," I explained, pointing to the figures. $42 million in 5 years. Fake fuel surcharges, ghost containers. The invoices are being auto-approved from inside the house. "Dad, this is huge. This is actionable fraud." Graham put on his reading glasses. He leaned in. I watched his eyes scan the columns. I saw the realization dawn on his face. His jaw tightened. For a second, just a second, I saw the old Graham Harlow, the shark who built an empire. "Who else has seen this?" he asked, his voice low. "Just me," I said. "I brought it straight to you." He looked up at me, and there was something in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. Respect. "Good work." "Violet," he said softly, "leave this with me. I will have legal look into." The heavy double doors swung open. Vivian breezed in, bringing a cloud of heavy floral perfume with her. She wasn't supposed to be there. She didn't have an appointment, but Vivian didn't need appointments. "Oh, look at this serious little meeting," she cooed, walking straight to Graham's side. Her hand rested possessively on his shoulder, her fingers kneading the fabric of his suit. "What is the crisis?" Graham hesitated. He looked at the binder, then at me, then at Vivian. "Violet thinks she found some accounting errors," Graham said. His voice lost its edge. It became neutral, safe. "Errors," Vivian laughed. A sharp, tinkling sound. She reached down and flipped the binder closed without even looking at the numbers. "Violet, honey, you are an entry-level analyst. You are staring at spreadsheets all day in that basement. It is easy to get confused, to see patterns where there are just standard operating expenses. It is $42 million. "Vivian," I said, my voice hard. That is not an expense. That is theft. Vivian's smile didn't waver, but her eyes went dead. Graham, she said, turning to my father, we are about to launch the Series B bonds. Do you really want an investigation right now? Imagine the headlines. Harlow Meridian cannot keep track of its own checkbook. The stock would tank. The shareholders would revolt. She looked at me. Violet is just being dramatic, as always. She wants to be the hero. But real business is about nuance. Graham looked at the binder, then he looked at the window. The fire I had seen in his eyes 5 minutes ago was gone, extinguished by the mere suggestion of a public scandal. Leave it, Violet, Graham said. He didn't look at me. Dad, look at the signature key. I pleaded. I traced the IP. It is coming from... I said leave it, he snapped. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Vivian smirked, a tiny quirk of her red lips. I walked out of the office without the binder. I knew, with a sickening certainty, that the money wasn't being stolen by a stranger. It was being siphoned by family, and my father was too weak to stop it. 2 weeks later, the retaliation began. I wasn't fired. That would have been too obvious. Instead, I was transferred. My supervisor in logistics, looking embarrassed, handed me a memo, effective immediately. You are being reassigned to internal risk management. It sounded important. It wasn't. Internal risk management was a polite term for a dead end. My new office was on the 3rd floor, in a converted server room that had no ventilation and no windows. My access to the main server was revoked. My job description was updated to policy review. I was tasked with proofreading the employee handbook for typos. I was isolated. No one spoke to me in the elevator. When I walked into the cafeteria, conversations died. I caught snippets of whispers as I passed cubicles. Heard she is having a breakdown. Obsessed with conspiracy theories. Graham is just keeping her on the payroll out of pity. They were gaslighting the entire building. They were painting me as the crazy, jealous daughter who couldn't handle the pressure. While Tori was the shining star, Tori was thriving. She was everywhere on the company newsletter, leading press conferences, organizing charity galas. She walked the halls like she owned the building, flanked by assistants who laughed too hard at her jokes. One night in November, I stayed late. I was trying to find a back door into the accounting server using an old terminal I had salvaged. I needed to pee, so I walked down the dark hallway toward the executive washroom. The door to the conference room was slightly ajar. A sliver of light cut across the carpet. I heard voices. It is working. I heard Tori say. Her voice was smug. Anderson in HR says 3 people complained about Violet's aggressive behavior today. I hadn't spoken to anyone that day. I had sat in silence for 9 hours. Good, Vivian's voice replied. Keep pushing. We need a paper trail. Make her look unstable. By the time the quarterly review comes, I want a file an inch thick. If she tries to bring up the Apex accounts again, we need to be able to say it is just the ramblings of a disturbed young woman. Just make sure Graham doesn't get sentimental. Tori said, Graham is handled. Vivian said. Her tone was dismissive. He is so afraid of scandal he would bury his own mother if I told him it would save the stock price. I stood frozen in the hallway, my heart pounding against my ribs. They weren't just stealing money. They were systematically dismantling my sanity to cover their tracks. I should have quit. I should have walked away then. But I was a Harlow. I had steel in my blood. 2. I decided to fight back. I waited for the steel contract. Harlow Meridian was bidding on a massive infrastructure project, a suspension bridge in California. It was the kind of contract that defined a decade, I knew, because I still had read access to the procurement logs, that we were planning to source the high-tensile cabling from a new supplier in Southeast Asia. I ran a check on the supplier. It was a subsidiary of a company that had been blacklisted in Europe for selling brittle steel. The carbon content was too high. In cold weather, under load, that steel would snap like glass. If we used that steel, people would die. I didn't go to Graham this time. I wrote a formal risk assessment. I attached the metallurgical reports from the European Safety Commission. I flagged the supplier as critical non-compliance. Then I made my mistake. I sent the report via email to the project lead, copying Graham and the entire board of directors. I thought transparency was my shield. I thought if everyone saw it, they couldn't bury it. I hit send at 10 in the morning. At 10:15, my inbox pinged. It was a reply from Tori. She had hit reply all. Subject re-urgent. Safety violation, Violet. It is deeply concerning that you are once again bypassing protocol to spread misinformation. We have vetted this supplier thoroughly. Your attempt to sabotage this contract with outdated and irrelevant data is not only unprofessional, it borders on corporate malfeasance. We understand you are under a lot of personal stress, but acting out to damage the company's reputation is unacceptable. Please see the attached independent verification of the steel quality. She attached a PDF. I opened it. It was a forged lab report. It had yesterday's date on it. They had been ready for me. They knew I would look. They had baited the trap, and I had walked right into it. At 10:20, a second email arrived. From Graham, Violet, my office. Now, the walk to the top floor felt like a funeral march. The secretary didn't look at me this time. She pretended to type, her eyes fixed on her screen. I opened the heavy oak doors. It wasn't just Graham, it was a tribunal. Vivian sat on the leather sofa, legs crossed, looking mournfully at the floor. Tori stood by the window, arms folded, radiating triumph. Darren Cole, the company lawyer, sat at the conference table, a stack of documents in front of him. Graham stood behind his desk. He looked furious. Not at the fraud, not at the danger, at me. Sit down. Violet, he said. His voice was cold steel. I remained standing. I am not sitting. Dad, that steel is dangerous, if you use it enough. Graham shouted. He slammed his hand on the desk. I flinched. I have defended you, he said, his voice shaking. I gave you a job when no one wanted to work with you. I overlooked your outbursts. I overlooked your obsession with undermining my wife and your cousin. But this sabotaging a $200 million contract, I did not sabotage it. I said, my voice rising, I am trying to stop you from killing people. Vivian sighed loud and long. See? She whispered. She is hysterical. It is the paranoia again. Darren Cole slid the stack of papers across the polished mahogany table. Ms. Rivera, he said, his voice devoid of emotion. In light of your erratic behavior and your violation of company communication policies, Mr. Harlow is offering you a choice. He tapped the paper. This is a letter of voluntary resignation. It includes a generous severance package of $50,000 and a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. You will agree that you left for health reasons. You will never speak of company operations, internal data, or family matters. And if I don't sign, I asked. Looking straight at my father, Graham finally looked me in the eye. His eyes were dead. Then we terminate you for cause, he said. Gross misconduct, corporate espionage, and we will release a statement regarding your mental health stability to explain your actions. You will never work in this industry again. You will be radioactive. I looked at the pen lying on the document. It was a Mont Blanc, heavy, expensive. I looked at Vivian. She was watching me with the predatory focus of a viper waiting to strike. I looked at Tori. She was smiling. A small, tight smile of absolute victory. They had won. They had the power, the money, and the narrative. I looked at my father one last time. The man who had taught me to ride a bike. The man who used to call me his little bolt. He was gone. The man standing there was just a CEO protecting his assets. I am not signing that. I said quietly. Graham's face hardened. Then get out. I turned around. Get security. Vivian barked. I want her escorted out. I do not want her taking anything. 2 guards were waiting in the hallway. They were big, silent men. They flanked me, one on each side. I didn't get to clear my desk. I didn't get my coat. I walked down the long corridor, past the glass-walled offices where people stared. I held my head high, but my insides were ash. We took the elevator down to the lobby. The ride was silent. When the doors opened, the lobby was bustling. The lunch rush. People I had gone to college with, people I had worked beside for months, stopped and watched. Violet Rivera, the boss's daughter, being frog-marched out of the building like a criminal. Tori was waiting at the reception desk. She must have taken the private executive elevator to beat me down there. She was pretending to sign for a package. But she stopped as I approached. The guards paused to let the automatic doors slide open. Tori leaned over the marble counter. Her eyes were bright with malice. "See," she said, her voice low enough that only I could hear, but loud enough to cut through the noise of the lobby. "You are not even her real kid. You are just a liability." I walked out into the blinding sunlight of the parking lot. I didn't have my keys. My purse was still upstairs. I stood on the curb, shivering in my blazer, while the massive glass tower of Harlow Meridian Industries loomed over me, reflecting a distorted, twisted version of the world I had lost. I had lost my job, my reputation, and the last shred of my father. But as I started the long walk to the bus stop, a cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. They thought I was a liability. They thought I was broken. They forgot one thing. Broken glass cuts deep. I drove north until the skyline of the city became nothing more than a gray smudge in my rearview mirror, and then I kept driving until the road turned from asphalt to gravel. I ended up in Maple Glen, a town that felt like it had fallen asleep in 1990 and never quite woke up. It was tucked into a bend of the river, surrounded by dense pine forests that smelled of sap and damp earth. It was the kind of place where people did not ask who you were, only what you could do. I rented an old cannery warehouse on the edge of the water. It was drafty. The roof leaked when it rained hard, and the heating system was a single, rusty wood stove in the corner. It was perfect. The first thing I did was sell the Mercedes. It was a sleek, silver coupe my father had bought me for my 25th birthday, a guilt gift he had given me via his assistant. I drove it to a used car lot 3 towns over and took the first cash offer the guy gave me. It was 30% less than Blue Book value, but I did not care. I watched the dealer count out the bills, $28,000 in crisp hundreds, and I felt lighter. That car was a cage on wheels. I used the money to buy a beat-up Ford pickup truck that rattled when it idled and enough power tools to outfit a small army. I bought a table saw, a planer, endless clamps, and a mountain of raw lumber. I was an engineer by trade, but I became a carpenter by necessity. Wood was different from steel. Steel did exactly what the math said it would do. Wood was alive. It breathed. It warped with the humidity. It had knots and imperfections that you had to work around, not grind away. It was stubborn, like me. I started small. My first client was a young couple who had bought a farmhouse down the road. They needed a dining table but could not afford the boutique prices in the city. I built them a farmhouse table out of reclaimed white oak. I sanded it until my fingerprints were gone, then sealed it until it glowed like honey under the workshop lights. When I delivered it, the wife ran her hand over the surface and smiled. "It feels strong," she said, "like it will be here forever." I charged them $400, barely enough to cover the materials and the gas. But that feeling, the feeling of creating something that brought peace instead of anxiety, was worth more than my entire salary at Harlow Meridian. Word traveled slowly in Maple Glen, but it traveled deep. I became the girl at the warehouse. I fixed the pews at the local Baptist church that had been creaking for 20 years. I built a set of floor-to-ceiling bookshelves for the town library, designing a rolling ladder system that glided as smoothly as a figure skater. I did not use complex blueprints or CAD software anymore. I used a pencil, a notebook, and my hands. My hands changed. The soft, manicured fingers of the corporate analyst disappeared. My palms grew calloused. My knuckles were perpetually skinned. I had a permanent splinter under my left thumb and sawdust in my hair that no amount of shampoo could fully remove. I looked in the mirror one morning and saw a stranger. She looked tired, but she looked real. My neighbor was a man named Logan Price. He lived in a small A-frame cabin about 200 yards through the woods. He was a retired firefighter, forced out of the service by a back injury at 40. He walked with a slight limp and had a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite. But his eyes were kind. He started showing up at the warehouse about a month after I moved in. He never knocked. He would just appear in the open bay door, holding 2 thermoses of black coffee. "You are cutting against the grain," he said one Tuesday. Watching me struggle with a piece of cherry wood, I turned off the saw. The silence rushed back in, ringing in my ears. "It is harder wood," I said defensively. "I need to force it." Logan took a sip of his coffee. "Wood does not like to be forced, Violet. It likes to be persuaded." He set the coffee down and walked over. He didn't take the tool from me. He just guided my hand, adjusting the angle by maybe 5 degrees. "Try it now." I pushed the wood through. It sliced like butter. Logan became a fixture in my life, a silent guardian who seemed to understand that I was running from something without ever asking what it was. He taught me how to read the rings of a tree to know how old it was when it died. He taught me how to sharpen my chisels until they could shave the hair off my arm. One afternoon, he watched me installing security bars on the small windows of my office area inside the warehouse. I was using heavy-duty lag bolts, drilling them deep into the brick. He chuckled, leaning against the doorframe. "You know, this is Maple Glen. The biggest crime we had last year was a raccoon stealing a pie. You are bolting those windows tight enough for a supermax prison." I stopped the drill. My heart gave a little jump, a reflex of fear I couldn't control. "I like to be safe," I said, not looking at him. "Safe is good," Logan said, his voice dropping to a gentle rumble. "But if you lock yourself in too tight, you forget how to get out." He left the coffee and walked away, his limp pronounced in the cold, damp air. To the people of Maple Glen, I was just Violet, no last name. I paid in cash. I kept my head down, but the world is small, and silence is lonely. So I started a social media channel. I called it The Quiet Workshop. No face, no drama. Just my hands and the wood. I set up my phone on a tripod and filmed the process, the rhythmic sound of the plane shaving off curls of wood, the satisfying click of a joint locking into place, the hiss of the varnish spray. I did not speak in the videos. I just added a simple voiceover later, explaining the engineering behind the joinery. The dovetail joint is one of the strongest in woodworking, I would say. My voice low and calm. It relies on tension. The harder you pull it apart, the tighter it holds. It is a paradox of strength. The channel blew up. Within 6 months, I had 50,000 subscribers. People found it soothing. They left comments saying my voice helped them sleep, or that watching me build a chair from scratch made them feel like the world wasn't falling apart. I started getting orders from outside the town, custom desks for architects in Chicago, bespoke cabinets for a designer in New York. It was success, but it was a quiet, private success. It belonged to me. It did not belong to the Harlow name, but you cannot build a wall high enough to block out the sky. Harlow Meridian was everywhere. It was on the steel beams of the new bridge they were building across the river 10 miles south. It was on the news in the diner where I ate breakfast on Sundays. One morning, I was eating my toast when the TV above the counter flashed a breaking news banner. Women in Power. How Vivian Ashford and Tory Gaines are revolutionizing the steel industry. I froze, the toast turning to ash in my mouth. There they were, Vivian, looking radiant in a white power suit, sitting on a plush sofa on a morning talk show. Tory was next to her, nodding earnestly, looking like the dutiful, brilliant heir. "It has been a challenging transition since my husband passed," Vivian was saying, dabbing a non-existent tear. "But Tory and I have leaned on each other. We have purged the toxic elements from the company. We have refocused on family values, toxic elements." "That was me," Tory chimed in, smiling that tight, rehearsed smile. "Aunt Vivian has been my rock. We believe that Harlow Meridian is not just a company, it is a legacy of trust. We want our shareholders to know we have nothing to hide. Nothing to hide." I gripped my coffee mug so hard I thought the ceramic would snap. The audacity of it, the sheer, unadulterated lies. They were wearing my father's legacy like a costume, parading their theft as virtue. And my father, Graham Harlow, was a ghost. In the archives of the news footage, he was always shown in the past tense, a static image standing next to Vivian, or holding Tori's hand at a gala. He looked strong in the pictures. He looked in charge. But I remembered the man who couldn't look me in the eye. I remembered the man who signed my termination letter to save his stock price. I left a $20 bill on the counter and walked out of the diner, my hands shaking. That night, the rain came. It was a heavy, relentless downpour that hammered against the corrugated tin roof of the warehouse like 1,000 tiny hammers. It sounded like applause. It sounded like the day I was fired. I fell asleep on the cot I kept in the back office, exhausted from sanding a walnut slab for 10 hours. But sleep was not a sanctuary. I was back in the elevator. The glass walls were closing in. I was wearing my blazer, holding my box of personal items. The numbers on the display were counting down. 40, 30, 20, but the elevator wasn't going to the lobby. It was going down, into the earth, into the dark. The doors opened, and I wasn't in the lobby. I was in the church. Vivian was standing at the pulpit, but she was 10 feet tall. Tori was laughing, a sound that echoed like screeching metal. You are not even real. The walls whispered, you are a liability. I felt hands grabbing me, security guards, faceless and strong. They were dragging me backward, away from my father's casket. I reached out, screaming for him. Look at me. Graham was standing by the casket. He turned, but he didn't have eyes. He just had 2 black hollows where his eyes should be. Do not disappoint me, the hollow said. I woke up screaming. I sat bolt upright on the cot, gasping for air. The warehouse was dark, lit only by the weak yellow glow of the street lamp filtering through the high windows. The smell of sawdust and rain filled my lungs, grounding me. I was in Maple Glen. I was safe. I was Violet the carpenter. I swung my legs over the side of the cot and put my head in my hands. I was shaking. It had been 4 years, and I was still waking up in a cold sweat because of them. The next day, Logan found me sitting on the loading dock, staring at the river. The rain had stopped, but the sky was a bruised purple. You look like you went 12 rounds with a bear, he said, sitting down next to me. He didn't offer coffee this time. He just offered his presence. Bad night, I murmured. He nodded. He knew about bad nights. You can rebuild a table, Violet. You can plane down the rough edges until it is smooth. But people are not wood. You cannot sand away the memory. I looked at him. He was looking at his own hands, scarred from years of fighting fire. Have you forgiven them? He asked. He didn't ask who they were. He didn't need to. I let out a short, bitter laugh. Forgiveness. That implies they asked for it. That implies they think they did something wrong. I picked up a wood chip and threw it into the mud. I just chose not to look in that direction anymore. I said, I built a wall. I put bars on the windows. That is not forgiveness. Logan, that is quarantine. He looked at me, his expression sad. Quarantine keeps the sickness out, Violet, but it keeps the healing out, too. He patted my shoulder and stood up, leaving me alone with the river. I thought I could sustain it. I thought I could live in this halfway house of existence forever safe, anonymous, and numb. I thought the past was a closed book, sitting on a shelf I could choose never to open. I was wrong. It was mid-December. The river had frozen at the edges. The warehouse was freezing. Despite the wood stove roaring in the corner, I was working late, finishing a cradle for a client's first grandchild. It was delicate work, requiring absolute focus. My phone was sitting on the workbench, buried under a layer of fine dust. It rang. The sound was shocking in the silence of the winter night. It was a shrill, mechanical intrusion. I wiped my hands on my apron and picked it up. The screen was bright in the dim light. The time was exactly 2 o'clock in the morning. I frowned. No one called me at 2 a.m. My clients emailed. Logan slept like the dead. I looked at the caller ID. There was no name, just a number, but I knew the area code, 440, Lake Haven. My heart stopped. I stared at the numbers, my breath catching in my throat. It had been years. Why would anyone from that life be calling me now? Maybe it was a wrong number. Maybe it was a telemarketer. But deep down, in the pit of my stomach, I knew. The air in the warehouse seemed to drop 10 degrees. My thumb hovered over the decline button. I should hang up. I should block the number. I should go back to sanding the cradle and pretend I never saw it. But I didn't. I slid the bar to answer and held the phone to my ear. I didn't say anything. I just listened. For a moment, there was only the sound of static, a hiss of white noise that sounded like distance and time. Then, a sound. A wet, ragged intake of breath. Violet. I dropped the sandpaper. The voice was a ghost. It was thin, trembling, and broken, sounding like it was being dragged over gravel. It was unrecognizable, and yet, I knew it in my marrow. It was the voice of a man who had not spoken my name in 5 years. Graham, Violet. "Is that you?" he rasped. I stood there in the cold, surrounded by the smell of cedar and the life I had built from scratch, and I felt the walls I had constructed so carefully, the sturdy windows, the thick doors, the quarantine begin to crack. "Dad," I whispered, my voice sounding small and terrified in the vast, empty warehouse. "Do not trust anything," he wheezed, the words fighting their way out of his throat. The line crackled, and just like that, the peace of Maple Glen was shattered. The past hadn't just knocked on the door, it had kicked it in. The ringtone was not just a sound, it was a physical intrusion. It sliced through the silence of my small bedroom behind the workshop, sharp and demanding. I jolted awake, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The room was pitch black, save for the aggressive, pulsing light of the phone screen on the nightstand. I squinted at the display. The numbers were glowing white against the dark background. There was no name saved in my contacts, just a raw string of digits, but I recognized the area code instantly. 440. Lake Haven. The breath caught in my throat. It was 2 in the morning. Nothing good ever came from Lake Haven at 2 in the morning. I reached out, my hand hovering over the device. The vibration buzzed against the wood of the nightstand, a frantic, insect-like sound. I hesitated. Every instinct I had built over the last 5 years told me to let it ring, to let it go to voicemail, to roll over and pull the quilt up and pretend that the world outside of Maple Glen did not exist. But the ringing was persistent. It was desperate. I slid my thumb across the glass and pressed the phone to my ear. I did not speak. I sat up in the tangled sheets, shivering in the cold air of the unheated room, and listened. For a long moment, there was only static. Then, underneath the white noise, I heard it. Beep, beep, beep. It was a rhythmic, mechanical sound. Electronic. Precise. It sounded like a machine keeping time. Then came the breathing. It was wet, ragged, and labored, like air being forced through a crushed straw. Violet. The name was barely a whisper. It was a rasp, dry and brittle. It sounded nothing like the booming baritone that used to command boardrooms and silence dinner parties. It sounded like a ghost trying to learn how to speak again. I froze. The blood drained from my face. "Dad," I whispered. My voice trembled in the darkness. "Violet, is that you?" I scrambled out of bed, clutching the phone with both hands. I began to pace the small length of the room, my bare feet slapping against the cold floorboards. "Dad, where are you?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. "What is happening? Why do you sound like that?" He did not answer my questions. He seemed to be fighting for every syllable. His focus narrowed down to a single, terrifying purpose. "Listen to me," he wheezed. There was a pause, filled only by the wet rattle of his lungs and the relentless beeping of the monitor. "Do not trust them. Do not trust anything Vivian shows you. Dad, you are scaring me. Are you in the hospital?" "Do not trust the will," he insisted, his voice rising with a sudden, frantic energy before breaking into a coughing fit. It was a terrible sound, a deep, liquid hacking that went on for 10 agonizing seconds. I stood in the center of the room, helpless, gripping the phone so tight my knuckles turned white. I wanted to reach through the line and help him. I wanted to call 911, but I did not even know where he was. Dad, please, just tell me where you are. I pleaded. He recovered his breath, inhaling with a sharp, whistling sound. Reeves, he gasped. You have to find Reeves. The name hit me with the force of a physical memory. Mr. Reeves, the butler. He had been with the Harlow family since before I was born. He was the man who had bandaged my knee when I fell off my bicycle at age 7, because Vivian was too busy with her tennis instructor to look at the blood. He was the man who used to sneak sandwiches to my room when I was grounded for not smiling enough at dinner. Reeves, I asked. Dad, Mr. Reeves retired years ago. I do not know where he is. Find him, Graham said. The urgency in his voice was palpable, vibrating through the speaker. He has it. He has the envelope, the brown one. It is the only way. Violet, the only way to what, Dad? Talk to me. He ignored me again. His breathing was getting faster, more erratic. The beeping of the machine accelerated in tempo. Beep, 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 beep. I am sorry, he whispered. The anger and urgency drained out of his voice, replaced by a profound, crushing sorrow. Sorry for what I stopped pacing. I held my breath. For everything, he said. His voice cracked. I saw it. I saw what they did. He took a shuddering breath. I let them beat you down. Violet, I stood there, and I watched them beat you down. For years, I just wanted peace. I was a coward. Tears pricked my eyes. Hot and sudden. I had waited a decade to hear those words. I had fantasized about this moment, my father finally admitting that he had sacrificed me to keep his new wife happy. But now that it was happening, it did not feel like a victory. It felt like a tragedy. It felt like a goodbye. Dad, it is okay, I said, my voice breaking. We can fix it. Just tell me where you are, and I will come get you. No, he said sharply. Do not come here. It is too dangerous. Just find Reeves. He has the proof. He has what belongs to you. Suddenly, the background noise on the call changed. I heard the distinct click of a latch lifting, the squeak of a heavy door opening on well-oiled hinges. The air in the room on the other end of the line shifted. I could hear the rustle of fabric, footsteps, sharp, clicking heels on a hard floor. Graham stopped speaking, his breathing hitched. Then, a voice cut through the static. It was a voice I hadn't heard in 5 years, but it still made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was smooth, melodic, and utterly cold. Vivian. Graham, she said. Her voice sounded distant, coming from across the room. What are you doing? Who gave you that phone? There was a fumbling sound. The phone clattered, as if Graham had tried to hide it under the sheets. Get away! Graham growled. It was weak, but the old steel was there. Give it to me, Vivian snapped. The pretense of the concerned wife vanished instantly. There was the sound of a struggle, the rustle of bed linens, the thud of a plastic cup hitting the floor, the sharp intake of Graham's breath as if he were in pain. No, Graham shouted, his voice tearing. I screamed into the phone. Dad, Dad, leave him alone. But they could not hear me. The phone had fallen. I could hear it sliding across a hard surface, maybe the floor. The sounds were muffled now, chaotic. You senile old fool, Vivian hissed. Her voice was closer to the microphone now. Who were you calling? Were you calling that ungrateful brat? There was a heavy thud, like a body being pushed back against a mattress. The beeping of the monitor went wild. Beep, 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 beep. A frantic crescendo of distress. I gripped the phone, tears streaming down my face. I was paralyzed. I was listening to my father being assaulted in his deathbed, 300 miles away, and there was nothing I could do. Then, there was a shuffling sound. Someone was picking up the phone. I held my breath, terrified that Vivian would speak to me, that she would laugh. But it wasn't Vivian, it was Graham. He must have grabbed it one last time. His voice was right against the microphone now, intimate and terrified. Violet, he wheezed, do not let them have it all. I fixed it. Remember Reeves. There was a sharp cry of pain, and then a loud clack. The line went dead. I stared at the phone screen. Call ended. The silence that rushed back into my room was deafening. It pressed against my ears, heavy and suffocating. I hit redial instantly. My fingers were shaking so bad I almost dropped the phone. It rang once, twice. Then, the number you have reached is not accepting calls at this time. Please try again later. I dialed again. The number you have reached. I dialed a third time. The number. I threw the phone onto the bed. I let out a scream of frustration that tore at my throat. I grabbed my hair, pulling at the roots, trying to ground myself in the physical pain. What just happened? I paced the room like a caged animal. My mind was racing, replaying every second of the call, the beeping, the confession, the fear in his voice. I let them beat you down, and then Vivian, the cold calculation in her tone, the violence of the struggle. He was in danger, he was dying, and he was trapped with her. I needed to go. I needed to get in my truck and drive to Lake Haven right now. I grabbed my jeans from the chair and pulled them on, hopping on one foot. Stumbling in the dark, I grabbed my keys. But then I stopped. Do not come here. It is too dangerous. Find Reeves. If I went to the house now, without a plan, without proof, what would happen? Vivian would have security at the gate. She would call the police. She would say I was harassing a dying man. She would spin it. A strange daughter tries to force her way in for money. I sank onto the floor, my back against the doorframe. I pulled my knees to my chest. I felt a cold, heavy stone settle in the pit of my stomach. It was the weight of helplessness. I sat there for hours. I watched the darkness slowly turn to gray as dawn crept through the single window. I watched the dust motes start to dance in the weak morning light. I didn't move. I just stared at the phone, waiting for it to ring again, waiting for him to call back and say he was okay. But the phone stayed silent. At 7 o'clock, the sun finally broke over the tree line, casting long shadows across the workshop floor. I stood up, my body stiff and aching. I walked into the main room of the warehouse and made a pot of coffee. I didn't drink it. I just held the warm mug, trying to thaw the ice in my veins. I was debating whether to call the Lake Haven police and request a wellness check when my phone chirped. It was a text message. I picked it up, my heart leaping into my throat. It was from an unknown number, a different one this time. I opened the message. Graham Harlow passed away peacefully at 412 A. Surrounded by family. Details regarding the memorial service will be forwarded in due course. We ask for privacy during this difficult time. The Harlow family. The mug slipped from my fingers. It hit the concrete floor and shattered. Hot coffee splashed over my boots and the hem of my jeans. But I didn't feel it. Passed away peacefully. Peacefully. I looked at the shards of ceramic scattered across the floor. I thought about the struggle I had heard. The shouting, the fear, the way the line had been cut. He didn't die peacefully. He died fighting. He died trying to get the truth to me, surrounded by family. That was the biggest lie of all. He was surrounded by wolves. I fell to my knees amidst the broken pottery and the spilled coffee. A sob ripped its way out of my chest, raw and ugly. He was gone. The chance to see him, to look him in the eye, to hear him say he loved me without the filter of a phone line, it was gone forever. But as the grief washed over me, something else rose up underneath it. It was cold. It was hard. It was sharp. It was the steel. He had told me to find Reeves. He had told me he fixed it. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. I stood up. I didn't bother cleaning up the coffee. I walked over to my workbench and grabbed a notebook. Find Reeves, the brown envelope. I wasn't just a carpenter anymore. I wasn't just the quiet girl in the workshop. I was a Harlow, and I was going to war. I did not wait for the funeral notice. I did not wait for the official invitation that I knew would never come. I threw a duffel bag into the passenger seat of my Ford pickup, ignoring the sawdust that coated the upholstery, and drove south. The drive from Maple Glen to Lake Haven usually took 4 hours. I made it in 3. My foot was heavy on the gas pedal, driven by a mixture of grief and a cold, burning rage that sat in my chest like a swallowed coal. By the time I reached the outskirts of Lake Haven, the sky had turned a bruised, iron gray, Rain began to spit against the windshield, mixing with the road grit. This was the city where I had learned to walk, learned to read, and learned that I was disposable. I turned onto Ridgestone Drive. The houses here were not houses. They were compounds. Massive estates sat behind high hedges and wrought iron fences, monuments to old money and new secrets. I drove past the manicured lawns until I reached the familiar limestone pillars of the Harlow estate. The gate was different. When I lived here, it had been an ornate iron gate that creaked when it opened, operated by a keypad that hadn't changed its code in 20 years. Now, it was a sleek, solid sheet of reinforced steel. Cameras were mounted on the pillars, their red eyes blinking in the gloom. I rolled down my window and pressed the intercom button. "Violet Rivera," I said, "I am here to see my father." There was a pause. Then a voice crackled through the speaker. Not the old security guard, Sam, who used to let me sneak out to go to concerts. This voice was crisp, professional, and utterly unfamiliar. "We have no authorization for a Ms. Rivera. Please turn your vehicle around." I slammed my hand against the door frame. "Open the gate," I shouted. "I am Graham Harlow's daughter. He died this morning. Open the damn gate." There was silence. I was about to ram the truck into the steel when the mechanism whirred. The gates began to slide open, just enough for a car to pass. I drove through, my tires crunching on the pristine white gravel of the driveway. As I rounded the bend, the house came into view. It was a sprawling Tudor mansion that looked like it had been cut out of a history book. But today, it looked menacing. I parked my rusted, dented work truck right next to a fleet of black SUVs. The contrast was almost comical. My truck smelled of pine and gasoline. Their cars smelled of leather and detailing spray. I stepped out. The rain was falling harder now, soaking into my flannel shirt and jeans. Before I could even reach the steps, the front door opened. Tori Gaines stepped out onto the porch. She was wearing a cashmere sweater and dark trousers, looking effortlessly chic even in mourning. She leaned against one of the stone columns, her arms crossed over her chest. She didn't look sad. She looked annoyed, like I was a delivery driver who had brought the wrong order. I noticed something immediately. She wasn't looking at me. She was angling her body slightly to the left, toward the security camera mounted above the door. She was performing. "Wow," she said, her voice loud and projecting. "You still remember the way home, I am surprised." I walked up the steps, my boots heavy on the stone. "Move, Tori." She didn't budge. She flashed a smile that was all teeth. Dad signed the papers. "Violet," she said, raising her voice for the microphone. "He signed the papers saying he did not want to see you. Do you not remember?" He wanted peace in his final days, not drama. I stopped on the step below her, looking her in the eye. He called me Tori at 2 a.m. Tori's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but she recovered instantly. She let out a short, derisive laugh. "He called you Violet. He has been in a coma for 2 days. The drugs alone would have made it impossible for him to lift a finger, let alone dial a phone. You are delusional." She pulled her own phone out of her pocket and held it up. Screen facing me. I saw the red dot recording. "Go ahead," she said. "Threaten me. Scream at me. Give me something to show the judge when you try to sue for money you do not deserve." I didn't scream. I pushed past her. I used my shoulder, the one that had spent 4 years carrying oak beams, and shoved her aside. She stumbled in her expensive heels, gasping in shock. "Hey, you cannot just—" I threw the heavy front doors open and stepped into the foyer. I expected the smell of home. I expected the scent of lemon polish, old books, and the faint lingering aroma of my father's pipe tobacco. Instead, the air hit me like a chemical weapon. It smelled of bleach, high-grade industrial antiseptic. Beneath that, the cloying scent of lilies. It smelled like a hospital wing, sterile and cold. I looked around. The foyer had been redecorated. The warm runners were gone, replaced by cold marble, and the walls. I spun in a slow circle. The walls used to be covered in family photos. There had been pictures of my mother, pictures of me at camp, pictures of us before Vivian. They were all gone. Every single frame on the wall was new. There was Graham and Vivian in Paris, Graham and Tori at a charity ball, Vivian receiving an award. It was a curated history of a family that only had 3 members. I had been erased from the architecture itself. You have no right to be in this house. The voice came from the top of the grand staircase. I looked up. Vivian Ashford stood on the landing. She was wearing a black silk robe that swept the floor, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wore no makeup, which was a calculated choice. It made her look pale, fragile, and grieving. But her eyes were dry, and they were hard as flint. "Where is he?" I demanded, my voice echoing in the cavernous hall. Vivian descended the stairs slowly, one hand on the banister. She moved like a queen descending to address a peasant revolt. "He is gone, Violet," she said softly, "and you are trespassing." I took a step toward the stairs. "I want to see him. I want to see the body." Vivian stopped 3 steps from the bottom. She looked down at me with a mixture of pity and disgust. "The doctor has forbidden unauthorized visitors," she said. "Even in death, we are respecting his privacy, and according to the legal documents filed with the state, you are a stranger." I felt the rage boil over. "I am his daughter," I shouted, "and I know he was awake. He called me. Vivian, last night, he told me to find Reeves." At the mention of the name Reeves, Vivian's hand tightened on the banister. It was a tiny movement. Her knuckles went white. Her eyes flickered, just a rapid blink, before returning to their steely gaze. She laughed, a low, breathy sound. "You are hysterical," she said. "Graham has not spoken a coherent sentence in weeks. He was on high-dose morphine. If you hallucinated a phone call, that is a matter for your psychiatrist, not me." She reached the bottom of the stairs and stood between me and the hallway that led to the master bedroom, the room they had turned into a hospice. "Go home, Violet," she said coldly. "Do not make a scene in front of the staff. It is pathetic." I looked past her. I could see the door to the master bedroom. It was closed. "I am going up there," I said. I lunged for the stairs. Vivian didn't move. She didn't have to. 2 men in dark suits stepped out from the shadows of the hallway. They weren't family staff. They moved with the efficiency of private military contractors. One of them caught me by the arm before I could reach the first step. His grip was like a vice. He didn't twist it, didn't hurt me, but he stopped my forward momentum instantly. "Ms. Rivera," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "You need to leave. Let go of me." I struggled, twisting my body, but the second guard stepped in and grabbed my other arm. I was a carpenter. I was strong. But these men were professionals. They turned me around, marching me back toward the front door. I looked back over my shoulder. Vivian was watching me, a faint smirk playing on her lips. She looked satisfied. She looked like she had won. Tori was standing by the open front door, her phone still raised, recording every second of my humiliation. "If Dad knew you came here just to beg for money, he would be so disappointed," Tori said loudly, pitching her voice for the recording. "He knew you would do this. That is why he protected us. I am not here for the money," I yelled, struggling against the guards. "I am here for the truth, whatever helps you sleep at night." "Sweetie?" Tori sneered. The guards shoved me out onto the porch. The rain was coming down in sheets now. I stumbled, nearly slipping on the wet stone, but I caught myself on the railing. The heavy oak door slammed shut in my face. The sound was final. Thud. I stood there, panting, my hair plastered to my face, the rain soaking through my clothes instantly. I stared at the wood grain of the door, feeling the vibration of the slam still humming in the air. They had thrown me out. They had denied me 5 minutes with my father's body. I turned to leave, defeated. As I walked down the steps, heading toward my truck, a movement caught my eye. The driveway curved around the side of the house, leading to the service entrance near the kitchens. Through the curtain of rain, I saw a white box truck parked there. It had no markings on the side, no hospital logo, no mortuary name, just a plain white van. 2 men in white scrubs were wheeling a gurney out of the side door. I froze. I squinted through the rain. The gurney was empty. They shoved it into the back of the truck with a loud metallic clatter. Then they went back inside. A moment later, they came out carrying boxes. Not medical equipment. Cardboard boxes. Files. They were moving fast, throwing them into the back of the truck with a sense of urgency that didn't fit a mourning household. Then, another man came out pushing a heavy medical cart. It was covered with a tarp, but I could see the outline of monitors, the heart rate monitor, the oxygen tank. They weren't just removing a body, they were scrubbing the scene. They were dismantling the room where Graham had died, erasing every piece of evidence that he had ever been there. Why, if he died of natural causes, if he died peacefully surrounded by family? Why the rush? Why the unmarked truck? Why the disposal of files in the pouring rain 10 hours after his death? I watched as they slammed the back doors of the truck and the driver jumped into the cab. The engine roared to life and the truck sped down the service drive, spraying gravel, heading for the rear exit of the estate. I stood there, shivering violently, water dripping from my nose and chin. Vivian lied. Tori lied. My father didn't just die. Something happened in that room, something that required a cleanup crew before the obituary was even printed. I looked back at the massive house. It loomed over me, silent and imposing, its windows dark eyes that had seen everything. I couldn't get back in. The guards were too strong, the walls too high. If I tried to force my way in again, they would call the police, and I would end up in a cell while they burned whatever was in those boxes. I needed help. I needed someone who could walk through walls. I needed someone who could see the things that Vivian was trying so hard to hide. I climbed into my truck, my wet clothes squelching against the seat. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely put the key in the ignition. I started the engine and turned on the heater, but the cold inside me had nothing to do with the rain. I put the truck in gear and drove toward the gate, watching the rearview mirror as the house disappeared into the mist. I wasn't going back to Maple Glen, not yet. I reached for my phone and pulled up a contact I hadn't used in 7 years. Noah Reed. He had been the guy in college who could find out anything about anyone, now. Rumor had it, he was the best private investigator in Harbor City. I hit call. It rang 3 times before a sleepy voice answered. Rivera. Is that you? It is Saturday. Do you know what time it is? I need you. Noah, I said, my voice steadying as the plan formed in my mind. I need you to find out who was in my father's room last night, and I need you to find a man named Reeves. Reeves? Who is Reeves? The only person left who knows the truth, I said, staring at the rain-slicked road ahead. And I think they are trying to erase him, too. I sat in the cab of my truck, parked by the river in Maple Glen, watching the gray water churn. My phone felt heavy in my hand. I had not spoken to Noah Reed since graduation, but desperate times called for people who knew how to dig through trash without getting dirty. Noah agreed to take the case, but his voice over the line was grim. I will look into it. Violet, he said, but you need to prepare yourself. If your father really was murdered, or even just neglected to death, finding that out is going to hurt more than not knowing. I told him I was already hurting. I needed the truth to cauterize the wound. Noah worked fast. He was a phantom in the digital world, able to pull employment records and bank transfers that were supposed to be buried under 5 layers of encryption. He called me back 2 days later. I was sanding a maple tabletop, the noise of the sander drowning out my thoughts. When the phone vibrated, I have something, Noah said, and you are right. It stinks. He broke it down for me, and every sentence was a nail in the coffin of my father's peaceful death. Graham's personal physician, Dr. Aris, the man who had treated his hypertension for 20 years, was fired 3 months ago, no reason given, just terminated and paid a hefty settlement to sign a non-disclosure agreement. Who replaced him, I asked, turning off the sander. A private nursing agency called Vitality Care. Noah replied, I ran the LLC. It is a shell company. Violet, it is registered to a P.O. box in Delaware, but the funding comes from a holding company that lists the board of directors. Guess who sits on that board? Let me guess, I said, my grip tightening on the phone. Vivian's brother. Close. Vivian's divorce lawyer from her first marriage. It is her people. Violet. She replaced a board-certified cardiologist with a team of contract nurses who answered directly to her. She controlled the meds. She controlled the access. She controlled the decline. I felt sick. It was not just neglect. It was a siege. A week passed. I threw myself into my work to keep from driving back to Lake Haven and burning the mansion down. I built 3 rocking chairs and restored an antique vanity, my hands moving on autopilot while my mind replayed the sound of my father's gasping breath. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, my phone pinged with an address. 1408 North Pine Street. Go alone. It was from Noah. I looked up the address. It was in the northern outskirts of Lake Haven, a blue-collar neighborhood of small, siding-clad houses and overgrown lawns. It was a world away from the gated community of Ridgestone. I drove down there in the late afternoon. The wind was whipping off the lake, cutting through my jacket. I pulled up to a small, weathered bungalow with a sagging porch. There were no luxury cars here, just a rusted sedan in the driveway and a bicycle leaning against the railing. I walked up the steps and knocked. The door opened almost immediately, as if he had been waiting by the window. Mr. Reeves stood there. He looked smaller than I remembered. The crisp black suit and white gloves were gone, replaced by a gray cardigan and corduroy trousers. His hair, once silver and perfectly slicked back, was now white and thinning, but his eyes sharp, intelligent, and kind were exactly the same. He looked at me for a long moment, his hand gripping the doorframe. "Violet," he said softly. His voice was thick with emotion. "You finally came. Mr. Reeves," I said, feeling tears prick my eyes. "Come in, child. It is not safe on the porch." Inside, the house smelled of bergamot tea and old dust. It was cramped but tidy. The walls were covered in framed photographs. But they weren't of his family. They were of ours. There was a picture of me at 5 years old, riding a pony. A picture of my mother laughing in the garden. A picture of Graham, young and strong, standing next to Reeves by the Rolls-Royce. It was a shrine to the family that used to exist before Vivian burned it down. Reeves led me to a worn armchair and poured me a cup of tea. His hands shook slightly as he set the saucer down. "I knew you would come," he said, sitting opposite me. "Your father knew it too. He held on to that hope until the very end. Tell me what happened. Reeves, why were you fired? Why did he call me?" Reeves took a deep breath, looking into his tea as if reading the leaves. "It started 6 months ago," he began. "Graham was not senile, Violet. He was tired, yes, but his mind was sharp. He started noticing discrepancies in the household accounts. Then he started looking at the company reports that Tori left lying around. He found the shell companies I asked. He found everything." Reeves nodded. "He found the inflated contracts. He found the transfers to accounts in the Cayman Islands. He realized that Vivian and Tori were not just spending his money, they were hollowing out the company from the inside. He was preparing to call the board. He was preparing to file for divorce. And then he had his heart attack," Reeves said, the words dripping with bitterness. "It happened the night after he confronted Vivian. He collapsed at dinner. Dr. Aris was turned away at the gate. The new nurses arrived an hour later. From that moment on, Graham was never the same. They kept him sedated. They told everyone he was confused, paranoid." I leaned forward, my heart racing. "So they drugged him. They kept him pliable," Reeves corrected, "just lucid enough to sign papers he could not read, but too groggy to fight back. Vivian controlled everything. Who came in, who went out. She isolated him completely, but he called me," I whispered. Reeves smiled, a sad, fleeting expression. "He fought them, Violet. In the moments of clarity, when the drugs wore off, he fought. He stopped taking the pills they crushed into his food. He pretended to swallow them and then spit them out. He was gathering his strength for one last push." Reeves leaned back, his eyes distant. "That night, the night he called you, I had snuck into the room. I was forbidden. Of course, Vivian had banned me from the second floor, but the night nurse had fallen asleep. Graham was awake. He was weak, but he was desperate. He begged me for a phone. He said he needed to hear your voice. He said he needed to warn you. I remembered the beeping, the struggle. Vivian found us. I said. Reeves nodded slowly. She came back early from her charity gala. She heard him speaking. She burst in like a fury. She snatched the phone. She realized I had helped him. He looked down at his hands. She threw me out that night. Violet, after 40 years of service, she gave me 10 minutes to pack a bag. She threatened to call the police and accuse me of theft if I did not leave the premises immediately. She wanted me gone before the ambulance arrived to take Graham's body away. She knew he was close. She hastened it. I felt a cold rage settle in my chest. She killed him. Maybe not with a knife, but she killed him. Reeves reached down to the floor beside his chair. He pulled out a small, battered leather suitcase. He opened it. Underneath a stack of folded shirts, there was a wooden box. It was made of dark mahogany, polished to a shine. It had a complex brass locking mechanism on the front. Graham knew he was running out of time. Reeves said softly, "About 2 weeks before the end, during a brief window where Vivian was in Paris, he had his old lawyer, Evelyn Marsh, come to the house disguised as a florist. They drafted this." Reeves placed the wooden box on the coffee table between us. He gave it to me for safekeeping. Reeves continued. He said, "If anything happens to me, give this to Violet. Do not let Vivian see it. Do not let Tori near it." I reached out and touched the wood. It felt cold and heavy. "He told me to find you," I whispered. Reeves reached into his pocket and pulled out a small brass key. He pressed it into my palm. His fingers were warm and papery dry. "Your father made mistakes." "Violet," Reeves said, his eyes locking onto mine. "He was a man who valued peace over justice for too long. He let that woman poison his house because he was afraid of being alone. But he loved you. In the end, he fought for you." I took the key. I inserted it into the lock. Click. The lid sprang open. Inside, nestled in black velvet, was a thick brown envelope. It was sealed with red wax. Stamped with the Harlow family crest, a lion holding a steel beam. The wax was old and brittle, cracked down the middle. On the front of the envelope, in handwriting that was shaky and spidery, barely recognizable as the bold script I remembered, were the words, "For Violet. Only open when you do not trust anyone in the house anymore." I picked up the envelope. It felt heavy, much heavier than just paper. It felt like a bomb. Reeves watched me, his face solemn. "Go," he said. "Take it back to your workshop. Take it somewhere safe. Do not open it here. And Violet." I looked up at him, clutching the envelope to my chest. "Do not let them win." I drove back to Maple Glen in a daze. The envelope sat on the passenger seat next to me, radiating a strange energy. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see black SUVs following me, but the road was empty. I got back to the warehouse well after dark. I locked the heavy steel door behind me. I threw the deadbolt. Then I dragged a heavy workbench in front of the door. I was not taking any chances. I went into my small office area and turned on the single desk lamp. The yellow light pooled on the scratched surface of the desk. I placed the envelope in the circle of light. I sat there for a long time, just staring at it. This was it. This was the voice of the dead. Once I opened this, there was no going back. I could burn it. I could walk away, stay in Maple Glen, build tables, and live a quiet life. But then I heard Tori's voice in my head. "You are not even her real kid." I heard Vivian's laugh. "You are trespassing." I heard my father's wheezing breath. "Do not let them have it all." I reached for my utility knife. I extended the blade. The metal glinted in the lamplight. I slid the blade under the flap of the envelope. The red wax shattered with a satisfying snap. I pulled the contents out. There were 3 things. First, a legal document bound in blue paper. The header read, "Last Will and Testament of Graham Alexander Harlow." It was dated 6 months ago. I flipped to the summary page. "I, Graham Harlow, being of sound mind, hereby revoke all previous wills and codicils. I leave my entire estate, including 100% of the voting stock in Harlow Meridian Industries, to my daughter, Violet Rivera. To my wife, Vivian Ashford, I leave the sum of $1. To my niece, Tori Gaines, I leave the sum of $1. I gasped. He had done it. He had actually done it. He hadn't just cut them out. He had insulted them from the grave. The second item was a thick dossier held together by a binder clip. I flipped through it. It was the Apex Trans Global investigation I had started years ago, but finished. There were bank statements, emails between Tori and the shell companies, proof of the Vitality Care kickbacks. It was a roadmap of felony fraud, racketeering, and elder abuse. It was enough to put them in federal prison for 20 years. And then, the third item, a single sheet of cream-colored stationery. The handwriting was messy, smeared in places where the pen had slipped, likely due to tremors. My dearest Violet, if you are reading this, I am gone, and I failed you. I spent my life building towers of steel, but I could not build a home safe enough for my own daughter. I let a wolf in because she wore a smile, and I let her push you out because I was too weak to defend you. I watched them chip away at your confidence, beat you down with words and silence, and I did nothing. I told myself I was keeping the peace. I was only keeping my own comfort. You are the only real thing I ever made. Violet, you have your mother's fire and my stubbornness. You are the only one worthy of this burden. Do not forgive me. I do not deserve it. But please, take back what is yours. Do not let them erase us. Love, Dad. I put the letter down. My hands were shaking so hard the paper rattled against the desk. A sob broke from my throat, sudden and violent. It wasn't a sob of grief. It was a sob of release. For 10 years, I had carried the weight of being the unwanted child, the mistake, the outsider. He had seen me. In the end, he had seen me. I wiped my eyes with my sleeve. I looked at the will. I looked at the criminal dossier. Vivian and Tori were probably sleeping soundly in their silk sheets right now, dreaming of their gala, confident that the crazy daughter was rotting in a warehouse. Defeated, they had no idea. I picked up the phone and dialed Evelyn Marsh's number. The lawyer Reeves had mentioned. It was late, but I knew she would answer. Violet, she answered on the second ring. Her voice was sharp, alert. I have the envelope, I said, my voice steady and cold as the winter wind outside. Good. Evelyn said, meet me at the courthouse at 8 in the morning. Bring everything. I hung up. I looked at the letter one last time. Take back what is yours. I stood up and walked over to the tool wall. I grabbed a crowbar, not because I needed it for carpentry, but because I liked the weight of it in my hand. I wasn't going to build anything tomorrow. I was going to dismantle something. I was going to dismantle them, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but the truth. I sat in the dim light of my workshop office, the smell of sawdust and lemon oil heavy in the air, reading the documents that would burn my stepmother's world to the ground. The will was not just a legal instrument, it was a weapon. I, Graham Alexander Harlow, being of sound mind and body, hereby bequeath 100% of the voting stock in Harlow Meridian Industries to my daughter, Violet Rivera. She is the sole heir possessing the moral capacity to correct the course of this family. I read that sentence 3 times. Moral capacity. It was the first compliment my father had given me since I was 12 years old. The distribution of assets continued. Vivian Ashford and Tori Gaines were to receive a fixed monthly stipend, calculated to be exactly enough to maintain a middle-class lifestyle, $2,000 a month, adjusted for inflation. They were explicitly barred from holding any board seats, executive positions, or entering any Harlow Meridian property without written authorization from the CEO, me. But the will was just the surface. The dossier Reeves had guarded was the deep rot. It was hundreds of pages of forensic accounting. Graham had been busy in those final lucid months. He had tracked every penny. There were inflated contracts with construction firms that did not exist. There were transfers to the Cayman Islands into accounts under Tori's maiden name. There was a charity foundation called the Ashford Initiative, which Vivian claimed was for art restoration. but the bank records showed the money was being funneled right back into her personal offshore trusts. And then, the handwritten notes in the margins. My father's shaky script, written with a pen that must have been slipping from his fingers. I took too long to see them for what they are. They are parasites. Violet will do what I was too afraid to do. Finally, I opened the letter addressed to me. Violet, I am sorry. That word is not big enough, but it is all I have. When your mother died, I looked at you and I saw her ghost. You have her eyes. You have her stubborn chin. Every time I looked at you, it hurt, so I pushed you away. I let Vivian fill the silence because I was a coward who could not handle the grief. I saw what they did. I saw the way Vivian cut you with words. I saw the way Tori mocked you. I let them beat you down because if you were small, if you were quiet, I did not have to face the woman you were becoming. I did not have to face the fact that you were better than all of us. I am leaving you a mess, my daughter, but you are the only one who can clean it up. Do not forgive me. Just win. I put the letter down. My chest ached with a hollow, crushing pain. He had pushed me away not because he hated me, but because he missed my mother. It was a tragic, stupid reason that had cost us 15 years. But I did not have time to cry. I had a war to start. I drove to the city as the sun was coming up. I met Evelyn Marsh at her office at 7 in the morning. Evelyn was 70 years old, chain-smoked slim cigarettes, and had been the general counsel for Harlow Meridian before Vivian forced her out. She reviewed the documents in silence, the smoke curling around her silver hair. After 20 minutes, she looked up. "This is it," she said, her voice raspy. "This is the original, the wax seal, the witnesses, Reeves and myself. It holds up, the document they read at the funeral. It was a fake," I said. "A forgery," Evelyn corrected. "A good one, probably using deep learning AI to mimic his signature and voice patterns for the notary. But this is ironclad. The law stands with you. Violet, as long as you have the stomach to pull the trigger." I looked at the dossier. "I have the stomach," I said. Evelyn made 3 certified copies. She locked the originals in a safe that looked like it could survive a nuclear blast. "Go," she said. "I will file the emergency injunctions with the court. By noon. Their assets will be frozen. But you should be the one to deliver the news." I drove back to Ridgestone. The morning rain had cleared, leaving the sky a sharp, piercing blue. I pulled my truck up to the steel gates, the same intercom, the same camera. I rolled down the window. "Violet Rivera," I said. There was a pause. Then, instead of the intercom crackling, a phone rang inside the guard booth. I watched through the tinted glass as the security guard picked it up. He listened for a moment. He looked at my truck. Then he looked down at a piece of paper on his desk, probably a fax Evelyn had just sent to the security firm's headquarters, warning them of impending litigation if they obstructed the legal owner. The guard hung up. He looked pale. The gate slid open. I drove up the winding driveway, past the manicured hedges, past the fountain that cost more than my entire warehouse. I parked right in front of the main entrance, blocking the path of Vivian's Bentley. I grabbed the thick folder of certified copies. I stepped out of the truck. The front door was locked, but I didn't ring the bell. I used the key Reeves had given me. It was the master key to the estate, one Vivian thought she had confiscated years ago. I turned the lock. The heavy tumblers clicked. I walked into the house. The foyer was quiet. I could hear the low murmur of the television coming from the main living room. I walked down the hallway, my boots echoing on the marble. I didn't try to be quiet. I wanted them to hear me coming. I stepped into the living room. It was a scene of domestic perfection. A fire was crackling in the hearth. Vivian was sitting on the velvet sofa, wearing a silk morning gown, sipping tea from a bone china cup. Tori was sprawled on the adjacent armchair. Scrolling through her tablet, on the massive television screen, a business news channel was running a segment. The Chiron read Harlow Meridian stock surges on news of seamless transition. The reporter was breathless. Vivian Ashford has shown incredible resilience, promising a bold new strategy. Tori looked up first, Her eyes went wide. "How did you get in here?" she demanded. "Sitting up?" "Security." Vivian turned slowly, setting her teacup down on the saucer with a sharp clink. She looked at me with an expression of pure exhaustion. "Really? Violet," she sighed. "Breaking and entering, is this your new low?" I didn't stop walking until I reached the glass coffee table that separated us. "I am not breaking in," I said, my voice calm, steady, and loud enough to drown out the TV. "You cannot break into your own house," Tori scoffed. She stood up, smoothing her expensive trousers. "Oh, give it a rest. Did you come back to beg for a job? Or maybe you want an increase on the allowance? I think the will said 0, but maybe Mom will give you $20 for gas if you leave right now." She reached for her phone, presumably to call the guards again. I threw the file onto the table. It landed with a heavy, authoritative thud. The papers fanned out slightly. "No," I said. "I came back to take what is mine." Vivian looked at the file. She didn't touch it. She was too smart for that. But her eyes narrowed. "What is this garbage?" she asked. "More conspiracy theories." I reached down and flipped the cover open. The first page was the notarized affidavit from Evelyn Marsh. The second page was the copy of the real will. That is the last will and testament of Graham Harlow. I said, "The real one, dated 6 months ago, witnessed by Arthur Reeves and Evelyn Marsh." Vivian's face remained a mask, but I saw a tiny muscle jump in her jaw. "We have a will," she said coldly. It was read by Darren Cole. "It is filed with the probate court." That was a forgery. I said, "And we can prove it. But this," I pointed to the paragraph about the voting stock. "This says I own it all. The company, the house, the cars, the accounts, everything." Tori leaned over, reading the text. Her face went slack. 100%, she whispered. "That is impossible. He hated you. He did not hate me." I said, "He was afraid of me." "There is a difference." I flipped the page again, revealing the dossier, the emails, the bank transfers, the proof of the Vitality Care kickbacks. "And this," I continued, watching Vivian's face, "is the reason you are not just going to be broke. You are going to be inmates." Vivian finally moved. She snatched the papers up, her manicured nails digging into the pages. She scanned the columns of figures. She saw the shell company names, Apex Trans Global, the Ashford Initiative. Her hands started to shake. It wasn't a subtle tremor. The papers rattled in her grip. "This is fabricated," she hissed. "You typed this up in your little shed. Graham never saw these accounts. He was confused. He was sick." I reached into the pile and pulled out the copy of the handwritten letter. I held it up, facing her. "Read it, Vivian." She looked at the shaky handwriting. She knew that script. She had forged it enough times to recognize the real thing. I watched her eyes scan the words. I watched the moment she hit the line. I saw the way Vivian cut you with words. "I let them beat you down." The color drained from her face. She looked older suddenly. The makeup couldn't hide the fear anymore. "He wrote this," she whispered, 2 weeks before you killed him." I said. Tori snatched the papers from Vivian's hands. She was breathing fast, her chest heaving. "No," she screamed. "This is fake. You are a liar." She grabbed the copy of the will. She ripped it in half. Then she ripped it again. She was frantic, tearing at the paper like a wild animal, throwing the pieces into the air. "It does not exist," she shrieked. "If there is no paper, there is no will. You have nothing. You are nothing." I stood there and watched her. I didn't move. I didn't try to stop her. I let her shred the entire file until the floor was littered with confetti. The room went silent, save for Tori's heavy breathing and the drone of the TV anchor praising their bold strategy. Vivian stared at the mess on the floor, then up at me. She was waiting for me to panic. She was waiting for me to scramble on the floor and try to tape it back together. Instead, I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was a smile of absolute, cold finality. I brushed a piece of lint off my jacket. That was a copy. "Tori?" I said softly. Tori froze. A piece of paper fluttered from her hand to the floor. "My lawyer has the originals in a vault downtown." I continued. and the digital copies have already been sent to the district attorney, the SEC, and the board of directors. I leaned over the table, looking Vivian dead in the eye. The game is not happening in this house anymore. Vivian, it is happening in court. I turned around and walked toward the door. Violet, Vivian shouted. Her voice was high, cracking with desperation. Violet, wait. We can talk about this. We are family. I stopped at the doorway. I looked back at the two of them, Tori standing amidst the shredded paper, looking like a petulant child, and Vivian clutching her silk robe, looking like a queen whose castle had just turned to sand. I am not your family, I said. I am the landlord, and your rent is past due. I walked out of the house and into the bright morning sun. The air smelled clean. For the first time in 10 years, I didn't feel the weight of the house pressing down on me. I climbed into my truck and started the engine. As I drove down the driveway, I saw a police cruiser turning in at the gate. Evelyn moved fast. I didn't stop. I had a hearing to prepare for. The legal filing hit the Superior Court docket at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning, and by noon, the shockwave had leveled the financial district of Lake Haven. We did not just file a contest to the will. Evelyn Marsh, my lawyer, went for the throat. We filed a civil suit requesting the immediate invalidation of the document presented at the funeral, the reinstatement of the will dated 6 months prior, and we attached a criminal complaint against Vivian Ashford and Tori Gaines for forgery, fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit grand larceny. The headlines were instant and brutal. The prodigal daughter returns. Violet Rivera sues. For the Harlow Empire. Stepmother accused of forging will as CEO. Lay dying. By the time the market closed that day, Harlow Meridian Industries stock had plummeted 15%. The board of directors, who had been so eager to toast Vivian's bold new strategy just days ago, went completely silent. They issued a brief statement saying they were cooperating with authorities, which was corporate speak for, "We are running for cover." The trial began 3 weeks later. The speed was unprecedented, driven by the sheer magnitude of the assets involved and the public interest. The courthouse was a zoo. News vans lined the streets for 3 blocks. Reporters jostled at the security checkpoints, shouting questions at anyone wearing a suit. When I walked into the courtroom, the gallery was packed. I saw faces I recognized, former employees I had worked with in the basement, shareholders, and half the social elite of Lake Haven who had been at the funeral. They were there to watch the blood sport. But in the very back row, sitting quietly with a baseball cap pulled low, was Logan. He had driven down from Maple Glen. He caught my eye and gave a single, solid nod. It was all the armor I needed. I sat at the plaintiff's table next to Evelyn, on the other side of the aisle. Vivian and Tori sat with their defense team, a phalanx of 5 lawyers from the most expensive firm in the state. Vivian looked pale, dressed in a modest gray suit, playing the role of the aggrieved widow. Tori looked terrified. She kept fidgeting with her pearl necklace, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. Evelyn's opening statement was surgical. "We will show," she told the jury, her voice raspy but commanding, that Graham Harlow did not change his mind. He was silenced. "We will show that the document presented by the defense is not the last wish of a dying man, but the desperate act of 2 women who treated a human life like an obstacle to a bank account." The defense tried to paint a picture of a family reconciliation. Their lead attorney, a slick man named Sterling, argued that Graham had a late-stage epiphany. He wanted to secure the future for the wife who stood by him, Sterling claimed. Pacing in front of the jury, he realized that his biological daughter, estranged for a decade, was not suitable to run a global conglomerate. Then, they played their evidence. It was a video clip, taken on a phone. It showed Graham in his hospital bed, looking gaunt and gray. He was barely holding a pen. Vivian's voice could be heard off camera, soothing and coaxing. "Just sign here. Darling, it is for the trust. It is to keep us safe." Graham looked confused. He blinked slowly. "Safe," he mumbled. "Violet, yes. It is for Violet too. Vivian lied smoothly on the recording. Just sign, the courtroom murmured. It did not look like a man making a sound executive decision. It looked like coercion. But the real blow came when we called our witnesses. Our first expert was Dr. Marcus Thorne, a forensic document examiner with 30 years of experience with the FBI. He put the two signatures on the massive projector screen. On the left was Graham's signature from the will I found in the envelope, shaky but fluid, with the distinctive heavy pressure on the H that he had used for 40 years. On the right was the signature from Vivian's will. If you look at the microstructure of the ink, Dr. Thorne explained, using a laser pointer, you will see hesitation marks. A human hand flows, a computer program, or a hand tracing a projection. Stops and starts at the pixel level. He zoomed in. The lines on the fake will were jagged, made up of thousands of tiny microscopic dots. This signature was not written. Dr. Thorne concluded, it was printed. It is a high-resolution laser transfer derived from a sample taken 3 years ago. It is a digital forgery. Vivian stared straight ahead, her face a mask of stone. Tori brought a hand to her mouth. Next, Noah took the stand. He looked out of place in his leather jacket, but when he opened his laptop, he was the most dangerous person in the room. He had subpoenaed the servers of the small law firm Tori had hired. We recovered deleted emails from Ms. Gaines's account, Noah stated. He projected an email dated 4 months before Graham died. The subject line was draft templates, urgency high. The text read, make sure the clause about the daughter waiving her rights sounds voluntary. If we make it look hostile, she might contest it. And can we backdate the witness signatures? The jury gasped. It was audible, a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the room. Tori closed her eyes. Her lawyer leaned over and whispered something urgent in her ear. But she just shook her head, tears streaming down her face. She knew it was over. They had plotted to disinherit me while my father was still eating breakfast at his own table. But the emotional knockout came from the witness I dreaded hearing the most. Her name was Sarah Miller. She was the night nurse who had been fired 2 weeks before my father died. She was a young woman, and she looked terrified to be testifying against the powerful Ashford family. But she raised her right hand and swore to tell the truth. Why were you terminated? Ms. Miller Evelyn asked gently. Sarah took a shaky breath. Mrs. Ashford asked me to adjust the morphine drip. Adjust it how she wanted me to lower the dose during the day, Sarah said, her voice trembling. Mr. Harlow was in severe pain. He had bone cancer metastasis. The protocol required constant management, but Mrs. Ashford said he was too out of it to handle business. She said she needed him lucid enough to hold a pen. And what did you do? I refused, Sarah said, crying now. I told her it was unethical. I told her it was torture. She fired me on the spot. She had security escort me out, and the agency sent a replacement within the hour. I stared at the table, my hands clenched into fists so tight my nails cut into my palms. Torture. She had tortured him. She had let him suffer in agony just so she could get a signature on a piece of paper. I looked at Vivian. For the first time, she wasn't looking ahead. She was looking down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring. The mask was cracking. Finally, we called Arthur Reeves. The old butler walked to the stand with the dignity of a king. He sat down, adjusted his glasses, and looked directly at the jury. He told them everything. He told them about the isolation, the blocked phone calls, the day Vivian banned me from the house, and then he described the night of the phone call. He was holding my hand, Reeves said, his voice thick with emotion. He could barely breathe. The machine was beeping so fast, but he looked at me and said, "Do not let them have it all. Give it to Violet." Evelyn let the silence hang in the air for a long moment. Did he say anything else? Mr. Reeves? Reeves looked at me. His eyes were wet. He said, "Tell her I am sorry I was weak. Tell her she is the strong one." I bit my lip to keep from sobbing. The court stenographer paused to wipe her own eyes. The defense team declined to cross-examine Reeves. They knew it would be suicide. Any question they asked would only make them look more heartless. Closing arguments were short. The defense tried to argue reasonable doubt, but they sounded defeated. Evelyn simply pointed to the pile of evidence, the forensic report, the emails, the nurse's log, and said, "This was not a family matter. This was a bank robbery in slow motion, and the victim was a dying man." The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they came back, the courtroom was electric. The foreman, a middle-aged schoolteacher, stood up. He held the verdict slip with shaking hands. In the matter of the estate of Graham Harlow, we find the document dated January 12th to be invalid due to fraud and forgery. We uphold the document dated August 4th as the true last will and testament. He continued, "In the civil suit regarding wrongful interference with inheritance and elder abuse, we find for the plaintiff, Violet Rivera." And then came the criminal referrals, which the judge read out based on the jury's findings of fact. Vivian Ashford was found liable for forgery, conspiracy, and abuse of a vulnerable adult. Tory Gaines was found liable for conspiracy and wire fraud. The judge looked over his glasses at the defense table. "Given the severity of the fraud and the evidence of physical neglect, I am referring this matter to the district attorney for immediate criminal prosecution. Bail is denied due to flight risk. Officers, please take the defendants into custody." The room erupted. I watched as 2 bailiffs moved toward the defense table. Vivian stood up, her face a mask of shock. "You cannot do this," she shrieked. "I am Vivian Ashford. I am the CEO." "Turn around, ma'am," the bailiff said, pulling her wrists behind her back. The click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound in the world. Tori didn't scream. She just crumpled. She put her head on the table and sobbed as the officer pulled her up. I watched them being led away. The flashbulbs from the press pool went off like a strobe light, capturing the fall of the Ashford dynasty in high definition. Vivian, looking disheveled and frantic. Tori, weeping and broken. They were led out the side door, toward the holding cells. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a heavy, exhausting relief. It was over. The noise, the lies, the gaslighting, it was all over. Evelyn squeezed my hand. "You did it, Violet." I stood up. I turned around and looked at the back of the room. Logan was standing there. He tipped his cap. I walked out of the courtroom into the hallway. The reporters swarmed, shouting my name, shoving microphones in my face. "Ms. Rivera, how do you feel? What is your first move as owner of Harlow Meridian? Will you visit your stepmother in prison?" I ignored them. I pushed through the crowd. Flanked by Noah and Evelyn, I walked out the front doors of the courthouse and into the sunlight. The air tasted different. It tasted clean. I looked at the city skyline, where the Harlow Meridian Tower dominated the view. It wasn't a symbol of my exclusion anymore. It was mine. But more importantly, my name was mine again. I wasn't the stepchild. I wasn't the ghost. I was Violet Rivera, daughter of Graham Harlow, and I had just brought the house down. The first time I walked into Harlow Meridian Industries as the majority shareholder. I did not wear a power suit. I wore jeans, a white button-down shirt, and my work boots, the same boots that still had a faint dusting of sawdust in the laces. The security guard at the front desk was the same man who had escorted me out of the building 5 years ago. He looked at me, then down at his clipboard, then back at me. His face went pale. He moved to step out from behind the desk, likely to ask for my badge, but then he remembered. He stopped. He simply pressed the button that unlocked the turnstile. "Good morning, Ms. Rivera," he said. His voice was tight. "Good morning," I replied. I took the elevator to the top floor. It was the same glass box that had haunted my nightmares, the one where the numbers counted down to my humiliation. But this time, the numbers were counting up. 40, 41, 42. When the doors opened, the executive floor was silent. The assistants stopped typing. The junior VPs poked their heads out of their offices. They watched me walk down the long hallway toward the boardroom. They knew who I was. I was the woman who had just put the former CEO in handcuffs on national television. I pushed open the heavy oak doors of the boardroom. The board of directors was already seated. 12 men and women in expensive suits who had spent the last decade looking the other way while Vivian looted the company. They had toasted her strategies. They had ignored the safety reports. They had let me be fired. Now, they looked at me with a mixture of fear and calculation. They were wondering if they could charm me. They were wondering if I was just a carpenter who would be overwhelmed by spreadsheets. I did not sit at the head of the table. I remained standing. I threw a thick binder onto the mahogany surface. It landed with a heavy thud that made the chairman flinch. "This is the new reality," I said. My voice was calm, but it carried to the back of the room. I looked at the chairman. "Effective immediately. We are initiating a forensic audit of every single subsidiary, vendor, and contract associated with Harlow Meridian. Any supplier found to be a shell company will be terminated. Any executive found to have authorized payments to those companies will be fired for cause and sued for restitution." The room was dead silent. "Furthermore," I continued, "I am rehiring the entire risk management team that was let go in the last 3 years. Specifically, I want Ben Miller found and reinstated as the chief safety officer." One of the board members, a man named Sterling, cleared his throat. "Ms. Rivera," he said, his voice oily. "Ben Miller was a disruption. He delayed the California Bridge project by months with his excessive caution. Ben Miller tried to stop you from building a bridge out of glass." I snapped. "The reason that project was delayed is because you bought steel that would have killed people. If Miller does not come back, you go." Sterling shut his mouth. I looked around the table. "We are going to bleed money for the next 2 quarters. I said, "We are going to pay fines. We are going to settle lawsuits, and we are going to fix every single structure we built with substandard materials. If you care more about the stock price than the fact that our bridges might collapse, you should resign right now." No one moved. No one resigned. They were sharks, yes, but they knew when there was a bigger predator in the water. I walked out of the meeting and went to my father's office. It still smelled of Vivian's perfume. I opened the windows to let the cold lake air rush in. I called maintenance and told them to remove everything: the furniture, the curtains, the art. I wanted it bare. I wanted to build it from scratch. The next day, I put the Ridgestone estate on the market. The real estate agent was horrified. "But Ms. Rivera," she gasped, "this is a landmark. The history is poison." I told her, "Sell it." I did not keep a dime of the sale. I took the $14 million from the house, along with the liquidated assets seized from Vivian and Tori, and I started a trust, the Rivera Compensation Fund. It was for the families of the workers injured in the factories due to safety cuts, and for the clients who had been defrauded. I did not want the money. I wanted the slate clean. I moved back to Maple Glen permanently. I did not want a penthouse in the city. I wanted the river. I wanted the smell of pine. I bought the land adjacent to my warehouse and expanded. I designed the new house myself. It was not a mansion. It was a home. It was made of cedar and stone, with large windows that let the light pour in. It had a massive kitchen, not because I cooked elaborate meals, but because I remembered the silence of the empty kitchen in Ridgestone, and I wanted a room that begged to be filled with people. One wall of the living room was dedicated to my work. I hung my engineering degrees next to my first hand-drawn sketch of a chair. I framed the first dollar I earned from selling a table. It was a reminder that I was both things: the engineer who understood the stress loads of steel, and the carpenter who understood the grain of wood. Logan helped me plant the trees. We spent a Saturday in October digging holes along the driveway. The ground was hard, getting ready for winter. But we worked in a comfortable rhythm. He dug, I planted. He stopped, leaning on his shovel, wiping sweat from his forehead. "You know," he said, looking at the row of saplings, "these sugar maples take 20 years to really fill out. That is a long commitment. I packed the dirt around the roots of a small tree. I'm not going anywhere." "Logan," I said. He smiled. It was a slow, warm smile that reached his eyes. "Good," he said, "because I finally fixed that leak in my roof, and I was hoping you would come over and inspect my work, since you are the expert now." We started hosting barbecues. It started small, just Logan and me. grilling steaks on the patio. Then the couple I built the table for came over. Then the librarian. Soon. My Sunday afternoons were filled with the sound of laughter, the clinking of beer bottles, and the smell of charcoal smoke. It was messy. It was loud. It was imperfect. It was everything Ridgestone never was. One evening in late November, just as the first frost was settling on the grass, I drove down to the small cemetery on the edge of Lake Haven. I had ordered a new headstone for Graham. The old one, chosen by Vivian, had been a grandiose marble monument listing his corporate titles. I had it removed. The new stone was simple gray granite. It had his name, his dates, and a single line of text that I had chosen. He tried. In the end, I stood there for a long time, my breath misting in the cold air. I placed a hand on the rough stone. It felt cold, but solid. I did it. Dad, I whispered. The company is clean. The workers are safe, and I started the Elena Scholarship yesterday. Full tuition for 50 female engineering students every year. I paused, listening to the wind rustle the dry leaves on the ground. I do not forgive you for the years we lost. I said, speaking to the silence, that hole does not just go away, but I forgive you for being human. You were scared, and fear makes people do terrible things. I thought about Vivian and Tori. They were currently awaiting sentencing in a federal detention center. The last time I saw Tori was on the news, being led into a van, hiding her face with a jacket. I remembered her voice in the church, whispering that I was not real. You are not even her real kid. For years, that sentence had been a knife in my gut. It had made me feel like an imposter in my own life. But standing there, with the keys to my own company in my pocket and dirt from my own garden under my fingernails, the words felt weightless. They were just sounds. They were the desperate lashing out of people who thought love was a transaction and family was a hierarchy. I was not Vivian's kid. Thank God for that. I walked away from the grave without looking back. I did not need to haunt this place anymore. A few days later, I was in my workshop, finishing up a set of chairs for the new safety engineer. Ben, as a welcome gift. There was a timid knock on the heavy sliding door. I turned down the radio. Come in. The door creaked open. It was Maya, the 12-year-old girl who lived 3 houses down. She was holding a crumpled cardboard box and looking ready to cry. Ms. Violet, she asked, her voice wobbling. My dad said you know about bridges. I put down my chisel and wiped my hands on my apron. I do. I said, what is the problem? She held up the box. It contained a mess of popsicle sticks and glue. I have a science project due tomorrow. She sniffed. It keeps collapsing. My brother said girls are not good at building stuff anyway. I felt a flash of heat in my chest. Not anger, but recognition. I saw myself standing in the living room at Ridgestone, holding my brochure for engineering school while Vivian laughed at me. I walked over to Maya. I knelt down so I was eye level with her. Your brother is wrong. I said firmly, let me see it. She handed me the wreckage. I examined it. See here, I pointed to the base. You are trying to use squares. Squares crush under pressure. You need triangles. Triangles are the strongest shape in nature. They share the load. I pulled over a stool. Sit down. I said, we are not going to glue it back together. We are going to start over, and we are going to build a truss bridge that could hold a brick. Maya's eyes widened. A brick, maybe 2. I winked. We spent the next 3 hours on the floor of the workshop. I showed her how to distribute the weight. I showed her how to create tension. I didn't take over. I let her glue her fingers together. I let her make mistakes. And when she got frustrated, I didn't tell her to quit. I told her to breathe. Patience, I said, echoing the words Logan had said to me. You cannot force the structure. You have to persuade it. By the time her mother came to pick her up, we had a bridge. It was ugly, covered in excess glue, but it was structurally perfect. We put a heavy hammer on top of it, and it didn't even creak. Maya looked at me, her face beaming. Thank you. Violet, she chirped. I watched her run out to her mother's car, holding the bridge like it was gold. I stood in the doorway of the workshop, watching the taillights fade into the dusk. The autumn air was crisp and smelled of wood smoke. I walked back inside. My phone was sitting on the workbench. I tapped the screen. The quarterly report for Harlow Meridian had just come in. For the first time in 5 years, the profits were down, way down. But the liability column, the column that measured the risk of lawsuits, the risk of injury, the risk of fraud, was 0. It was a clean sheet. I picked up my mug of tea. It was still warm. I looked around the workshop. I saw the tools I had bought with my own money. I saw the drawings of the furniture I had designed. I saw the empty chair where Logan usually sat when he came over to talk about nothing and everything. I realized then that I had won. I hadn't just won the lawsuit. I hadn't just won the company. I had won the ability to define who I was. I wasn't the victim. I wasn't the stepdaughter. I wasn't the liability. I was the builder. I took a sip of tea and turned off the main overhead lights, leaving only the warm yellow glow of the desk lamp. Outside, I could hear the wind moving through the young maple trees we had planted. They were small now, but they had deep roots. They would grow, they would last, and so would I. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please comment below where you are listening from. I would love to hear your thoughts. Do not forget to subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and press the hype button so this story can reach more people.